Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to a new episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. Just days after Israel's war with Hezbollah entered into its new phase of a fragile ceasefire, Syria began to unravel. Rebel forces of the late Nusra Front and now of a new organization, led by radical Islamic fighters, has taken over Aleppo and is now on track to conquer other parts of fractured Syria. What does this mean for Israel? What does it have to do with the war in Lebanon? And what does it mean for Iran and its plans to project power and create proxies around the region to use to threaten Israel? I'm joined today by Hussein Abdul Hussein. He's a research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, FDD, and he focuses on the Gulf region, Yemen, including on Gulf relations with Iran, as well as peace with Israel. He was born and raised in Beirut, Baghdad, and Baalbek, cities that have been the theater of major events across the region. He used to be a reporter and was later the managing editor at Beirut's newspaper called the Daily Star. And he's reported from war zones on the Lebanese border with Israel and from Iraq. And now he's based in Washington, where he's a fellow at FDD and a regular analyst and commentator on all events that are taking place in the region. Hussein gave us insight into what's happening in Syria and what this has to do with his old country of Lebanon, where Israel has severely beaten Hezbollah. And what does it mean for the future of Assad's regime? And what might happen to Israel's north? Here we go.
Hussein, it's great to have you with us on the JPPI podcast. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me on.
So we're here to talk a bit about Syria and other developments here in the region, but I think a lot of people are looking definitely at Syria and they're saying, hold on a second. Israel, Hezbollah pretty much just wrapped up a 14-month war, fragile ceasefire. Hopefully it sticks, but who knows what might happen. War in Gaza continuing. We've had the standoff, of course, with Iran, multiple attacks, retaliatory attacks and strikes, both sides. Everything else going on in the region. Syria was quiet. What suddenly changed that now Syria seems to be falling apart?
The main change has been the weakness that Israel has caused to Iran, Islamist Iran, and to the proxies, especially in Lebanon, Hezbollah, of course, and to a lesser extent in Syria. And it seems that Assad was relying on these militias more than we believed that he was relying on them. And once these militias weakened, I think the other militias, the Hezbollah and the Iranian militias are the Shia ones. The Sunni ones saw an opportunity. The ones backed by Turkey and Qatar, they saw an opportunity in going after Assad. And I think this is what's been happening. The Hezbollah guys are too weak to help prop up Assad. They lost their positions. And the Jabhat al-Nusra and all these kind of radical, wacko Islamists, we've seen them burst out of their Idlib province in the north on the border with Turkey, and they've taken Aleppo, and they're trying to push further south to take Hama. Last time I checked, this was the fault line where everything is happening.
So what can you tell us, Hussein, about this group, the Tahrir al-Sham, which used to be the al-Nusra Front, and we know them. Al-Nusra was something that we knew from the beginning of the Syrian civil war back in 2012, 2013. They were affiliated at one point with Al-Qaeda, then they broke away, and they were part of the rebels that I think at even one point they were supported by the United States, and they had some even relations here with Israel and to some level. Now, maybe not these rebels, but some rebels. Who are these guys? What do they want?
Most of the time, most of these guys are just mercenaries, and the way that they brand themselves depends on the donors. So, for example, ISIS was mostly former secular Iraqi Ba'ath pro-Saddam people, Sunnis, of course, who were on the back foot because of the onslaught by pro-Iran proxies inside of Iraq after the toppling of the Saddam regime. So all these secular guys eventually turned into Islamist, and that's because there was no money left with the secular people. All the money came from Islamist sources.
Mhm.
The same thing you see happen in Syria most of the time. You see people moving, fighters moving back and forth between radical Islamists, not so radical, moderate, secular, not so secular. So they just change hands back and forth. Now, to your answer about Jabhat al-Nusra, they started as a franchise, as an Al-Qaeda franchise. This is where they started getting the money from. But like everything Islamist, Qatar usually shows up. And when Doha shows up, Doha understands how the world works, and it tries to put an image that looks more moderate than than the radical Islamist group really is. And we saw the
Mhm.
same thing happened with Hamas.
Right.
So Hamas, for example, wants Israel destroyed, period. And what
But
the
when
Qataris,
they're in Doha, they're wearing suits and they're going to cocktail parties and they
right,
look like they're diplomats. Exactly.
absolutely. And in 2017, the Qatari pressure prompted Hamas to issue a new founding declaration. So they had the new manifesto, if you want, of Hamas. And in that manifesto, they said, we accept a Palestinian state. And of course, Al Jazeera and Qatar spun it in such a way to sound as if these guys accepted the two-state solution. They never said that. They never said
Right.
two states. They said we accept only one state. The other part will, we'll see what happens to it later. So the same thing Qatar did to Jabhat al-Nusra when Qatar showed up, started, working with these guys. Qatar decided, okay, you need a better image than the one that you have as being a subsidiary or a franchise of Al Qaeda. So here, this is some money, rebrand yourselves. We're sending you the Al Jazeera anchors and interviewers to interview you, say these things, try to look civilized and decent and whatnot, not radical and crazy. So this is basically what happened. And you see the same guy, Jurani, who was the chief, the founder of al-Nusra, now calls himself Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And I'm sure he'll change his name, if something else changes
What
or
is,
arises.
but I mean, I actually want to ask you about him, but before that, what is the Qatari interest in all of this? Is it project power? Is it I mean, there's a lot of talk about Qatar of investing in the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, like, what do they want here with this group?
So this is a long story, but to make a long story short, is that you have to think about when the Qatari coup took place in 1996. So the Emir Hamad, who's now called the Emir the father, sort of retired and passed on his
To
position
his
to his
son.
son Tamim. But when this coup happened, the religious establishment of Qatar did not take the side of the new ruler. Now, mind you, Qatar is the only country whose majority is Wahhabi Islamist. The first being, of course, Saudi Arabia. And in Wahhabi Islam, the clerics always pledge allegiance to the ruler. They do not act independently on their own.
Mhm.
So when Qatar couldn't muster the support of these guys, it had to rely on another Islamist outfit. And this is where the Muslim Brotherhood, which was living in exile in Doha at the time since the 1960s, this is where the Muslim Brotherhood came in handy, and they provided the government of Qatar at the time enough cover. And this is how it started, reliance on the Muslim Brotherhood and friendship with the Islamists. Since then, the Wahhabi establishment has changed. Since then, Saudi Arabia has pushed out the Islamist element in its government. So Wahhabism is not a part of the Saudi government anymore or decision making. But the Qataris hosted these guys again. And you add to the Wahhabis and to the Muslim Brotherhood, you add a third factor. You probably know the guy. He was a member of your Knesset, Azmi Bshara. And this
Mhm.
is the Christian, secular, pan-Arab nationalist who supports the
And
Nasser
he has
days.
a news website. I mean, talking to another former journalist, right? You were the managing editor of the Daily Star in Lebanon, but Azmi Bishara has a website now also, which just promotes anti-Israel A lot of anti-Israel news there.
I think website would be an understatement. We have to add an S, so it would be websites. Many websites and TV stations and channels and you name it, and think tanks, and the sky is the limit for him. But the reason I mention him is that Qatar foreign policy stands on these three legs: the Muslim Brotherhood, the Wahhabi Islamism, and the Azmi Shara secularism. And by the way, none of them fits together. I mean, these guys hate each other in normal circumstances, but I guess money talks. So all of these guys are now under the wing of Qatar. So this is where the friendship between Islamism and Qatar comes from. And this is where the animosity of Qatar towards Saudi Arabia comes from. The Qataris, the current rulers, believe that Saudi Arabia never took their side when, during the 1996 coup. So there has been spite, and there has been all sorts of stuff going on in here. So since then, Qatar has taken this line, and at the same time, it sells itself as an ally. You probably know that President Biden, his first act in office, was that he proclaimed Qatar as a major non-NATO ally. So on one hand, they are the major non-NATO allies. On the other hand, they're trying to rebrand a radical Islamist to make him look slightly less Islamist and crazy. So so it's a mixed bag of foreign policy of everything. The bottom line is that eventually it hurts the United States, it hurts the Western world, and it hurts the free world. And this is what people like me and many others have been trying to convince Washington, that, okay, they are nice on one hand, but they're very, very terrible on the other hand. And to an extent that we can't really not see what they're doing.
So going back to Syria for a moment, al-Julani, who is this leader of the group, what they refer to as HTS, right, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, they're making impressive gains. They were in Idlib, they've now taken Aleppo. As you said, they're moving on to other parts of the country. Northwestern Syria seems to be gone or out of the control, at least, of Assad and his forces. You do have the Russians that are there providing some air support. You have Iran, which might send some of its forces now into Syria. But as you mentioned, Hussein, Hezbollah has been beaten pretty badly by Israel. So it's not really in a position to come to Assad's rescue once again. How do you see it developing or evolving? I mean, are they going to go, is al-Julani going to go further south? Is he going for Damascus? Are we going to see again gun battles all throughout Syria like we did, just about 10 years ago or so? Where is this headed?
So what we know and what we remember actually from the Syrian revolution, or which turned into civil war eventually, was that the Syrian armed opposition was really beating Assad, and he was retreating. And he was in desperate need for two things. Number one, firepower, and number two, manpower. And he was really he couldn't muster enough manpower or firepower to check the advancement of the opposition. So what he did was that he got manpower from the Iranians, and he got firepower from the Russians. So this is what helped Assad push back everybody and maintain his territory. Mind you, all the territory that the pro-Iran militias helped Assad recover, they kept to themselves. They never handed the territory over back to Assad. So you had some sort of, even though they were allies, but Assad's control was limited to his enclave, the northwest, the coastal strip, and a corridor that connected him to Damascus, parts of Damascus, and a corridor that connected to Aleppo and parts of Aleppo. What you see happening now is that, number one, with Israel beating the Iran proxies, Assad has lost manpower. And with Russia being very busy with Ukraine, he lost the Russian firepower. And what you see now is that these guys are advancing because they clearly have the advantage of manpower, and they too can beat him because he doesn't have parity of fire. I mean, he probably still has a few fighter jets and tanks and whatnot, but there's no one to man them. There's not enough people to man these weapons or to, to fight the fight. So I don't think that Assad will, at this point, I don't see him just crumbling all of, like losing all of the enclave. I mean, these guys are still getting the radical Islamists. What they're winning from Assad is mainly territory where Sunni Syrians were displaced. So empty territory that was being held partially by the Iranian militias, partially by some Assad troops. So these are really easy to grab for the Islamists. But if these people get closer to where Assad is fortified, say for example, the neighborhoods in Damascus or the northwest strip, the northwest enclave where the Alawi minority is concentrated, I think that'll be a totally different battle. And I'm not sure that Julani and these Islamists will go all the way to take this part. If I read these guys correctly, even though they didn't set any goals for their campaign, what they said on day one or probably day two was that once we take back all this territory, we're resettling all the displaced. The displaced will be coming back home. To my mind, this is a number one Turkish goal. The Turks have been unhappy with the millions of Syrian refugees that they've been handling over the past few years, including Erdogan himself. He promised the Turks to try to push these Syrians out. So the first goal would be to get back the displaced from Turkey back to Syria. And that'll be a huge achievement for Erdogan. And number two, his other achievement is that he has taken he'll be taken territory from both Assad and the Iranians. So
Right.
Two achievements for him at the same time.
So here's the question every Israeli wants to know, and we'll ask it as the old saying goes: is this good for the Jews or is it bad for the Jews? Right.
Well, I wish there was, a single answer for this. I wish there was a silver bullet for this. It depends on the outcome. If Assad collapses completely and Syria turns into this, a territory where Julani is the only ultimate ruler and master, I'd say this is not the best news in the long term. But if like what we're saying, that these guys expand but then stop, and Syria will continue to be divided into 2, 3, or 4 Syrias, then I don't think much will change. Now, mind you, part of what Julani might take is the Homs region. This is now under the control of Hezbollah.
Right.
And this Homs region has been the hub where they receive arms shipments from Iran.
Very
and send them back-
sophisticated, also chemical weapons and the likes. Right.
and send them through the border. Homs is right on the border with Lebanon, so they send them across the border into Lebanon. And I've seen some reports that the Hezbollah top command used to take refuge during the early days of war with Israel. That's where they had a base. They probably still have it in Hamas, where that's where they take refuge. So if the Julani folks take this spot, then this bridge between Tehran and Beirut will certainly be severed. They'll have to go through other routes, but I can't really see how. These guys will be taking Aleppo, Deir ez-Zor, Hama, Hamas. So Assad won't be in control, or at least won't be able to help protect this land bridge. It'll be severed. If this happens, so I think that'll be to Israel's advantage. But then again, I'd never recommend to rely on someone like Julani for the security of Israel, or long-term strategy for Israel.
No, 100%. By the way, what is that they do with their one finger? Wherever they go around, they pick up that one finger. What is that?
So this is technically a symbol of monotheism. This is you can't see this. The Shia would never do this. This is a Sunni thing. Toward the end of prayer, whoever is praying would raise their index finger, I'm sorry, just one of them, 3 times, I guess. I'm not Sunni, so I wouldn't know, but this is how, Sunnis conclude their prayer. The two prayers are similar with minor differences. So this index finger came to symbolize, I think it was first used by Osama bin Laden as, to symbolize monotheism. And since then, it's become a sign mainly for radical Islamists. I wouldn't say you would find a moderate Muslim, whether Sunni or Shia, definitely not Shia, but you wouldn't find a moderate Sunni Muslim raising their index finger as, as a Christian would do the cross, or, as
Right.
other religions express their symbols in different ways. But at this point, I'd say it's still a radical symbol thing. It has not become a mainstream Islamic thing.
So Hussein, I got to ask you, I mean, you're from Lebanon originally, right? The Baalbek region, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct,
And,
yes.
I look at the region over the last 14 months and kind of even what you were just talking about with regards to Syria, one of the options, the severing of the Iranian potential transfer, that land bridge from Iran to Syria to Lebanon. Iran has been dealt a very significant blow over the last 14 months. Now, this has been a very long war for Israel, no doubt, with painful prices that Israel has had to pay. But when you look at Hezbollah, I think many of us would not have believed a few months ago that we would have the achievements that we have, whether it's the elimination of their top leadership, the decimation of their long range and strategic weapons, lots of the Dakhia and the Bekaa Valley destroyed where they kept those, some of their bases and command centers. Syria now teetering, Iran hit with the Israeli strike at the end of October, and the S-300 surface-to-air systems destroyed. The Houthis are battered. Hamas, of course. I mean, this is a good thing for the region, no?
It's an excellent thing for the region. I mean, to my mind, the Israeli military performance over the past year, 6 months, 3 months in the case of Hezbollah, if we take September 15 as the starting point of the actual war, I think this victory has been so enormous that it's big, if not bigger than the 1967 victory, or whatever would be the biggest victory in the history of the state of Israel. I think it's enormous, it's huge. Now, this is the trick, and I think luckily the Israeli establishment has been clear-eyed on this. Victory alone cannot change things. You have to play the long game. You have to be patient, and you have to make sure that an organization like Hezbollah does not reconstitute itself, rearm, and comes back to life. And if we know anything about the Iranians, is that this is their game. They're beaten, right. They hunker down, and they start rebuilding. And I can tell you that as we speak now, Hezbollah is working on rebuilding. And I've seen statements put out by Lebanese municipalities outlining the amount of money that Hezbollah is planning to spend to reconstruct the residential units of its partisans. So like this very moment, and right after reconstruction will come the revival of the arsenal and the militia. So these guys have their eyes on reviving the whole thing. And I think what I fear is that most of the time, big powers, America, Europe, everybody else, even Gulf capitals, they lose interest and they take their eyes off the ball. And when they do that, this is when people like Hezbollah and Hamas, this is the time when these guys come back. Right. So at this point, I'm happy what's going on is going on. But I think we have to be patient. We have to keep on trying to groom reliable partners, even if we don't find any. But, I mean, this is something that we should never give up on. And keep your eyes on the ball.
I mean, but what I keep on saying to people here is that it's very easy right now to be preemptive and to respond to every violation. But that's not the challenge. The challenge will be a year from now, very much to what you're saying. Things are quiet. economy's back here in Israel, international flights are back, tourism's back. And then you see them moving a rocket, you see them digging a tunnel, and then you say to yourself as the prime minister, I should attack to keep the deterrence, to show them they can't do it. But if I do, there's now couldn't be quiet. I got tourism. It's the summer, school year. There becomes other considerations. That's why it's really complicated. I totally agree. But what I wanted to ask you though is, I hear this from some Lebanese who I speak to, who no longer live in Lebanon, who live, different places and around the world. A lot of them Christians who say, Israel, we wish you would keep going, right? Take him down all the way, free Lebanon from Hezbollah. Now, that's a lot to ask of Israel because that would require a prolonged war and the occupation of Beirut and other parts of the country, which Israel did not want to go into. But my question to you, Hussein, is can Lebanon somehow take this forward? Like, the kind of like the metaphor that I use in my mind, and I could be wrong, and I'm curious what you think, is, in basketball, you have this thing like the alley-oop, right? Like I throw up the ball next to the basket and you come in and you slam dunk it, right? So I set you up to score the ball. Israel kind of set up the Lebanese people to finish this off to some extent. Hezbollah is weaker than it has ever been. Do you identify within Lebanon some sort of political, military, I don't know what force that can finish off what needs to be finished?
So yeah, well, that's a great question, and let me rephrase it in terms of a more classic terms. The saying that you can drive a horse to the river, but you can't make it drink.
Right.
And I think this is the situation between Israel and Lebanon. So what Israel has done now is that it has gotten the Lebanese who oppose Hezbollah and who want to wrestle this sovereignty from the hands of Iran and Hezbollah. Israel has gotten Lebanon next to the river. So this is Lebanon and there's the river. Now Lebanon will have to drink. Israel can't make Lebanon drink. So whether Lebanon drinks or not, it's anybody's guess. I mean, as someone who hails from Lebanon, I wish to see them do it, and I encourage them to do it all the time. But if they don't do it, what Israel should do is to make sure that the horse doesn't go back away from the river again. And this takes us to the first part of your question, where you say, a year from now, we see something moving, do we strike or not? I understand that no country, including Israel, including the United States, by the way, can just stay on a war footing forever. I mean, war is exhausting for everyone, for everything, for the budget, for the politics, for the people. But what Israel should do is that Israel should remain engaged. So Israel doesn't have to be on a war footing, but has also to stay focused on this objective. I'll give you a quick example from Iraq, because every time you say Iraq, people just draw a straight line from the time 2003 when we went in, toppled Saddam, until now, and they draw a straight line and they conclude it didn't work. Well, I'm sorry, it did work. By 2010, 2011, with the surge of troops that President Bush had ordered at the time, and with the Sahwat tribal forces, violence in Iraq in 2010 had come down to pre-2003 levels, to the safest it could have gotten. And what happened after that was that President Obama did not understand what it took to bring Iraq to where it was at the time. So what Obama did, oh, great, we fixed it. Okay, see you folks. And he got out. And the biggest mistake was that, number one, we stopped funding the Sahwat tribes, which is a minor amount of money by US standards. We stopped being engaged. We stopped funding the Sahwat or supporting them diplomatically, the Sunnis, the Sahwat. And what Iran did was that exactly what we were saying, they relapsed, they came back. And they pushed the Sunnis had to react, and ISIS was born. So the same thing can happen in Lebanon. You have them where you want them to be. I'm not advocating for Israel doing more. I don't think if Israel goes into Beirut, this problem can be solved. I disagree with all the Lebanese who think that Israel should finish the job. There's nothing that Israel can finish anymore. Israel is currently standing exactly in the right place and has to keep Lebanon where it is now. Now, the challenge is that you wouldn't want to see a relapse. So you wouldn't want Hezbollah to come back, the Lebanese not to go through with whatever they signed on, their cabinet endorsed, the plan that they call the arrangements now, the enforcement of 1701, all these things you have to keep on pushing diplomatically. And you have to stay focused on to make sure that 2, 3, 5 years from now, we're not back at it again, just full-scale war again.
Exactly. Very challenging and a lot of moving pieces, but Hussein Abdul Hussein, I want to thank you very much for joining us. It was really fascinating and enlightening to get your perspective on this dynamic and ever-evolving region. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Yaakov. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode. You can find us always on Mondays and Thursdays on podcasts where they can be found, Spotify, Apple, and of course on YouTube and the website of the Times of Israel.